Yes, what happens when you take two vibrant brothers that are descendants from the Greeks in Constantinople, embracing their American roots, and then ask them to serve up rich tales of traditions, cuisine, childhood memories, and a hearty dose of humor? You're about to find out. This is Baklava Banter, your passport to all things Greek. All right, here we go again. So, that was a pretty good luau party this weekend.
Oh yeah. What was better was that we you flew in under the guys.
Did a turn and burn.
Yeah. And
you surprised me.
Surprised you? How did surprised you how? Because Mom was there?
Exactly.
Yeah, listen. I don't know. She was less. I think you were less surprised than she was because she had to question me on where I was and where I was going, and I went out for ice, and it took us 2 hours to get ice.
Right, because you came to pick me up from the airport, and
yeah,
that seemed suspicious to her.
Highly suspicious, especially when we put the 411 out on her that she was going to be at this party.
Yeah.
And people started bringing her gifts like they're paying homage to the deities out there,
Oh, yeah.
Drop the gift.
I'm sitting right across from her on your deck there, and people are coming up. Yeah, like it's she's the head of some mob or something.
Yeah.
Saying, "Oh, you're Petraki's mother. So great to meet you. Here's a little something." And she kept looking at them going, how do you know to, bring me this? Why do you do this? And I kept telling her, I said, Ma, ever since we did the last episode, told you you're going to be famous. You're already famous. And that played out exactly as I told her. So I think she had a good time, though.
Oh, yeah, she did good. But the fact is, when people asked her if she's gonna cook for them, she couldn't say no fast enough.
Yeah, exactly.
It was like, no.
Right.
No.
Right. Because we know she likes to say, yeah, I can't cook anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not going to cook anymore. And then the next thing you know, you go to her house and the food starts coming out of the, four freezers now?
Yeah, 4 freezers.
Yeah.
They're at 110% capacity. So,
Yeah, so I think that was good. That's always fun. It's always fun to do an episode where there's a mom story. Let's
yeah, she's gonna see this and she's gonna be like, why are you talking about me again?
Yeah. Let's why don't we do the word of the day? We talked about, I don't think we did it in the last time. I think we did it in the first episode, but
yeah,
I've got a good one today.
Okay.
This again is what are we calling them? The Greeklish. These are the English words that tend to get a little skewered when they're pronounced by somebody who's native Greek speaker in particular. So today's word for you, come up with a good sentence for this, is U2. Y-O-U-T-O-O is the way I would spell it. U2.
So U2, not any confusion with U2 the band, is a noun, again, for those spelling bee people out there. So, I'll use it in a sentence. I like to watch old Greek shows on YouTube. It's very good.
Very good.
YouTube. So those of you playing the home edition of What's the Word, U2 is YouTube.
Yeah, that's always heard that a couple of times. I was right up there with the Facebook.
Well, we've been hearing that a lot over the last few weeks, especially when we hear, I do not want to see me on YouTube ever again.
That's right. Because Mom loves her iPad because she can watch all the shows and the news from Greece and Istanbul and so forth on there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So we talk about we try to touch on Greeks in the news or Greeks that made the news, and I think last week or the week before, you had reached out to me, and I'd forgotten about this, but I think this is cool to talk about. Uh, what is it now? It's the 45th anniversary. I think we're coming up to the 45th
Well,
anniversary
yeah, it just was just last week.
last week of Olympic Airways flight 411.
Yeah.
Now, we all know or have seen the movie of the Miracle over the Hudson,
Called
with
Sully.
with Sully with the plane landing in the river. But 45 years ago, this is crazy. And if there's anybody out there listening who by any chance was there or was on this flight, boy, we'd love to hear from you. But you want to talk about that because you had initially kind of brought it back to my attention, and we went through it again, and it's like, wow.
Yeah, so this flight was a 747 flight. It was going from Athens to JFK. Majority there was with crew there were 418 passengers or souls on board. Um, so when you look at this and you look at uh, U.S. Airways 1549, which was the Miracle on the Hudsons with Sullenberg, you look at the pilots. First, you got to look at the pilots themselves, because those are the two variables that saved both of these aircrafts. You have Sullenberg was 57 years old, ex-military. The captain of uh, Flight 411, his name was Sifis Migadis, a 55-year-old ex-military pilot. Um, his co-pilot, Kostas what is it? Fikadidis. I know I botched it up, and I apologize for that. Um, these guys were best friends, but in '78, this story didn't get a lot of traction anywhere, uh, just because there was no internet at the time, and they landed the aircraft. Everybody survived. But when you go back and you look at the story itself, this plane should never have taken off to begin with. First, if you living in Arizona, if the temperature is too warm, you can't take off. If it gets too hot,
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into the specifics of aerodynamics, but when it gets too hot in the desert, you can't create any lift. It was 43 degrees Celsius that day, which equates to 109 degrees Fahrenheit. Really hot, really hot. And if you've been to Athens, so you know how hot it get. Now you know how hot it gets. Just remember, this is the old Helicon Airport, um, which I believe closed in 2001. Um, so it was right in the center of Athens, and Athens is dry and arid. Um, but there's so many variables that played into this. The 747-200, even the current ones, have four engines. The day before this flight, it went into maintenance. Engine number two, which is the engine closest to the pilot of the left side of the aircraft, went into maintenance. The pilots knew going into it that it could only go to 96% capacity. So when they got cleared to take off, and it was a beautiful day to fly that day, um, they got cleared to take off. Now, the way the 747-200 works, their cooling mechanisms to keep those engines cool, which are Pratt and Whitney's JD9D/7As, they have a cooling system to cool off the engine right before the combustion chamber, where the fuel actually ignites and creates the thrust. So it's a mixture of water and glycol. So right before the plane takes off, at that time you used to have flight engineers. You have the pilot, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer who would sit right behind the co-pilot. Uh, the pilot will give the order to activate the engines, the water pumps, And in front of the pilot, there's 4 lights that come on. Each pump has its own engine, has its own indicator light. And basically, for 2.5 minutes upon takeoff, once they go take off thrust, it cools the engines down. And then what happens? That cooling mechanism allows the aircraft to get extra thrust. Again, I'm not going to get too much into the aerodynamics or the operation of the 747, but it goes to play into what happened here. So as they're rumbling down the runway, and the captain in this pulls the yoke back, and the nose comes off the runway, engine number 3, which is the closest to the co-pilot, explodes. So much so that there's material all over at the end of the runway. So the captain pulls the yoke all the way back. The perimeter fence, which is 12 feet, they barely got over that. They were able to get to about 150 feet or so off the ground. And all along, they start skimming off the roofs, and TV antennas are coming off the roof. So the pilot gives the order to raise the landing gear. Now, if you look at the Boeing SOPs for takeoffs, they tell you that
SOPs, standard operating procedures.
Correct.
Yes.
That when you bring the gear up, the doors have to come down. It takes 15 seconds for the doors to come down and the landing gear to go up. In those 15 seconds, you increase the drag ratio, and it slows the plane down. He did it anyway because he knew that's the only way he was going to save the aircraft. Luckily for that, they didn't lose too much airspeed. So as they're tumbling toward the center of Athens now, their biggest concern is they got to get lift on this as possible. So they're fighting the aircraft, and they're coming up to a hill in the distance, and they know they got to clear this hill. In the meantime, air traffic control thinks that they're going to crash into this mountain. Luckily for them, there was a shift in the winds, and it gave them a little uplift right there, just to raise them just far enough, and they just cleared the mountain by 9 feet, and it kind of dropped below the mountain. They couldn't see the control tower couldn't see it, so they already thought the plane was doomed and was going to crash, because at this time the pilot and co-pilot weren't talking to the control tower. They were just concentrating on what they wanted to do. So what happened then is their speed ended up being like around 164 knots, which was, they should, in all practical sense, if in the cockpit at time, you should have been hearing pull up, pull up, pull up,
Yeah.
But luckily for them, they were flying solo into the ground. Ground effect, which is basically, again, I'm not going to get into the aerodynamics of this, but basically, if you take the wingspan, cut it in half, if you fly that far above ground, it creates a cushion of air underneath the aircraft and kept the plane afloat. The flight attendants afterwards, there's in northern part of Athens, there's it's called the Inter-American Building. It's almost like the Pan Am building in Manhattan.
Right.
And they said they flew so close and at the same height that the flight attendants could see the people in the offices. Kind of crazy.
I'm sure the people in the offices
right?
were like, what was that?
Yeah, exactly. So then what happened is, as they moved north of the city, and they're slowly they're picking a little altitude up, because they're out of the city, all of a sudden the temperature starts dropping. So it goes from 43 degrees Celsius to a 38 degrees Celsius. So basically from 109 to just over 100 degrees, which is it's much more in the range of the operation of the engines. So they were able to pick a little more speed. The captain then felt more comfortable that he then turned to the west over the Gulf there. And then what happened is they dumped fuel for 30 minutes. So I think they had something like 140 tons
Yeah.
of fuel on this plane. Now, the reason you need extra fuel, not because 747, but because of the, like I mentioned before, the water glycol mixture to cool the engines. So I don't know if you ever seen like on B-52s have the same type of apparatus. You know when they take off, you see a lot of the black smoke. It's
Right.
all the so what happens? The water glycol displaces the jet fuel, and it causes that black smoke. It's the same principle here. That's
Right.
why people are like, oh, we got to get rid of the 747s because they're not environmentally friendly. You know. Um. So what happened? They dumped 30 minutes of fuel. Pilot was able to come back around, land the plane, park it at the gate. He gets off the plane, and waiting at the gate now are his daughters because air traffic control, the tower in Athens, called his kids up and were like, listen, your father's going to crash. We think you should come to the airport.
Yeah.
And here he is getting off the airplane, then waits a few hours, boards another 747 with the same crew, with the same passengers, and flies to JFK with no incidences. Now, the funny thing about this, when you read that there are a few accounts by passengers. Now, I don't know if these are. You got to think it's 1978. I don't know if these were kind of ignorant Americans. They thought that the pilot was taking them on a scenic route so they can get a better view of the city.
Yeah. And
So it just
wasn't it that the flight attendants knew what was going on but didn't say anything? So that
yeah,
added to the
yeah.
yeah.
Because the one flight attendant in the rear of the plane called the purser up front and says, I think we're in for it," and the purser says, "Yeah, I think so too."
Right.
Now again, this is and then after it landed, Olympic contacts Boeing in Seattle and tells them what happened, and they didn't believe it. They're like, "This is impossible because this plane should have crashed." It's not after Olympic turned over the flight data recorder where Boeing took it, the information, punched it into their simulators, and this plane crashed every single time.
Yeah.
So when you start drawing parallels between this and 2009 with Cactus 1549 and what happened in the Hudson River, the parallels are just
Yeah.
amazing, where the variable that made a difference was the captain of the aircraft. Um, it's really, really striking. What kind of frustrates me about this story, it's not the fact that he was able to say, it's not that the fact that this happened. Listen, accidents happen all the time. It's the fact that this story, I mean, the story's been out there for over four decades now.
Right.
But why hasn't the media picked this up? Why do I have to see a remake of every single movie? Why does like a company like Universal have to make like Fast and Furious 4 million? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Vin Diesel's getting into that car in a walker. Eventually, like this is a great script, and if we go, we'll add. If you're watching this on YouTube, we'll have a photo of the captain on this, because if you look at the captain, Captain Migadis, um, and you could take his photo and compare it to Tom Hanks's role in Saving Mr. Banks, who he played Walt Disney. Tom Hanks can do this. Like, there's no reason why Tom Hanks, he can play both
Another
Sully and
right.
and
Right.
call it for what it is. It's the miracle at the Acropolis, plain and simple. This is like, when you look at the aviation of this and the aviation technology of the time, we didn't. This guy didn't have what the 1549 had. He didn't have the glass bottom, avionics that they have now. This guy flew on pure knowledge. And afterwards, he went on and say, he goes, at the time, Olympic Airlines was so hell bent on being the safest airline that they kept training him and training him. He credited his training, but but his real life experience behind the throttle of an aircraft is what really saved this plane. I
The,
mean,
the other the other interesting things about this wasn't the plane it was called What was the name of the plane? It was the first,
Olympic Zeus.
the Olympic Zeus. Wasn't it the first 747 that Olympic had taken delivery of?
First or
I,
second. I
right,
did find out that afterwards this plane was built in 1974, 75. Afterwards, it was sold, and the funny thing is, and we were talking about this afterwards,
right,
Olympic sold it to TWA, and the flight the plane flew until 1997. I'm not sure where this plane is
right.
now. I don't know if it's at some boneyard somewhere. I don't know if it's been dismantled for parts. Um, but talk about history, like,
That's crazy. And then
I
the
mean,
other,
I think we talked about before regarding TWA. It seems like in the 70s and early 80s, Helicon Airport in Athens was like the epicenter of hijackings. Um,
right,
it was
right,
the 1984, 85 hijacking at TWA. Again, going to Athens. I think it was going to New York again. That movie, the movie Delta Force made that hijacking,
right,
I want to say infamous, but
right,
popular in mainstream media.
right,
Um, but it's just like, again, if anybody in is watching this or hearing this who's working in some sort of movie production, listen, this plane was up for almost 40 minutes,
yeah,
okay, in the air. The Miracle on the Hudson was up for like 3 minutes, and they made an hour and 40-minute movie out of this thing.
exactly, yeah,
Okay, this should be like a Netflix
yeah,
5 episodes special or something like that. Because I think when you look at it, it was a different time, different place in the 70s as far as marketing of um, airlines trying to bring people in. Like now, if that happened, I think this thing would have blown up. Marketing, this
right,
captain would have been everywhere. He would have been on every talk show, you know. But think about this, like if this happened today, marketing team could have said Olympic Airlines, even though Olympic Airlines is not the same Olympic Airlines as it was before. Olympic Airlines, the home of Mount Olympus and the gods, and the home of heroes.
yeah,
And you could have played that, like
right, right.
over and over and over again,
The
as a
other,
matter of fact, I think when we were young, in our first trip to um
the Greece.
Athens was an Olympic Airlines.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
And
which is funny because I was back when you could smoke. I remember.
yeah, and the funny thing about the aircraft, the thing I remember, the thing that comes to mind about that flight,
Yeah,
the only thing is when we landed back in JFK, it was a little bit of a hard landing, and the oxygen masks fell
right.
out.
All dropped. Right,
Yeah, and I'm like,
right.
okay, it's like confetti coming down.
Yeah.
Um,
The other crazy thing with this with 411 is there was never a final report because
because the Athenian, the Greek government never had an agency like the NTSB, which investigates all crashes or close
right.
crashes. Um, in Greece, they didn't form one until 2004, which freaking blows your mind a little bit
Yeah,
because you're like, okay, well, eventually they formed it, and I'm like, I would love to, like, I wish somebody had the foresight to save those tapes, and maybe somebody has them saved. Who knows?
yeah,
Maybe they're at some vault at Boeing somewhere. But my God, I would love to do like, I would love to have heard when they landed and they're taxiing back to the gate.
yeah,
I would have loved to hear these guys talk and like
yeah.
Costa Telizuzo, oh Telemuzo, like, or they look
That was
back to
like
the flight. They look because the story goes, and this has yet to be. I mean, Boeing engineers at the time, they're blaming the engineer for this.
right,
That they're saying that it inadvertently turned off the water pumps.
right,
And there's other people who have looked at this as well. If he turned off the water pumps, the indicator lights would have been shut off, and they
right,
wouldn't have been green. So nobody really knows. Nobody's looked at the data. But hey, like, what are you gonna do? Like, I think of the guy in Airplane who pulled the plug and the runway lights went off. Like, did he turn them off and be like, Ooh,
Right. Right.
sorry.
But what's even crazier is, and you said it towards the beginning of the story. So they were basically right from the get go about 9 feet away from being arguably one of the worst aviation disasters
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
And it ended up being like, I almost wonder if it was almost because nothing happened, it was almost low key, like, we're fine.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that Boeing, on the technical side, called it a loss, even though it wasn't a physical loss because they lost an engine. So
Right.
on their side of it, they viewed it
Right.
as a loss. But listen, the captain is this. When you look at some of the limited amount of reporting that was done, he gave a few comments, and basically his biggest concern was he knew how much fuel he had on board. He knew if that plane went down, not only would the 418 sold been, you would have had bodies scattered across Athens. We're not talking about tens or 20. We're talking about a fireball erupting in downtown Athens that would have killed thousands of people. And if you can't call this guy a hero, there should be a statue of this guy at the airport out in
Yeah.
Athens.
Yeah.
He should be commemorated somehow. And he died. I know he's passed away since. Um, but the fact that you don't this guy should be just as famous as Sully, if not more. These are like modern day heroes that, humble man. He was just doing his job, doing what he knew how to do, doing what he did, what he was trained to do. My hat's off to him. But again, someone needs to make this into a freaking movie.
No,
Somebody
there's
needs to. I would
there's
love, I would love to play the air traffic controller because obviously he has a limited amount of lines.
yeah.
Olympic 411. Athens here. Hello. Like, imagine this. I would love to hear those recordings because I would love to see when they go down, because they go over this mountain, they
And then they
come down,
disappear. Yeah.
and they get, at the time they didn't really have satellite tracking. It was all done by like Doppler at the time. And so even though they had a transponder, they couldn't pick him up once he dropped below the mountain. They thought he was good. But once he made that left-hand turn, can you imagine it coming back on your radar? Like, holy crap. Like, I would have heard this guy. Like this guy's
It
probably
would have been
like,
like a soccer game when you score a goal.
oh yeah, yeah. But these guys up there would have been like, oh, we saved it. Like, you didn't do crap up there. Like,
Yeah.
but again, I don't want to berate anybody in the control tower at the time. But again, if anybody is still alive that worked the ground crew, that was a passenger,
Yeah.
that was, in the tower that day, or we would love to hear from you if you see, like, would love to talk to you, because I think this is just a spectacular story.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, and there's a lot of great stuff that we think about in terms of, doing this part of the to do to do something in this part of the show in terms of, like I said, Greeks in the news, Greeks that made the news, and this one is one that, like you said, it's everybody knows Sully and the Miracle on the Hudson, but 45 years ago, long before that happened, this was just epic.
Yeah, it's
But
funny if you had like a CNN at the time or some sort of global news service. Um, this thing would have been it would have been everywhere. It would have been
yeah,
everywhere. Every passenger on there would have, you know, someone would have come out and been like, somebody from New York, from Queens, from Astoria, would have been there and been like, let me tell you what happened. I was sitting there, we were eating our baklava, our pre-flight baklava, and all of a sudden the captain said, we're going to see Athens, and like, and it's just like,
yeah,
I honestly don't think that the passengers ever really knew
yeah.
how close they were to perishing. I don't ever think. I bet you when he finally made that left-hand bank and was over the Gulf there and they dumped their fuel and it was able to gain some altitude then, um, I'm sure he came on, and said basically, hey, we have some engine problem. We're going to return back to Greece, to Athens. Um, we'll be back on the ground in 5 to 6 minutes. I'm pretty sure that, and I'm sure until the story came out, I can't tell you if it came out weeks later, days later. These people, I still don't think they had any idea because it was probably just a local story. And by the time they got back to New York, it was never reported on.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I mean, without an NTSB, not that somebody wouldn't record on it, but the way it went down, it just seemed like it almost became a, you
Yeah,
know, no
yeah.
no big deal.
You got to remember a few years ago. Remember that JetBlue flight going into LAX where the landing gear was twisted.
Right.
That got. They had people. It's LA. You know, these are the same people that were cheering on OJ, but they had people on the side of the 405 there at LAX
Right.
videotaping this plane coming in because
Yeah.
everybody wants to see the train wreck. You know.
Right.
So imagine the footage that got compared to this. I'm sure people would have been lined up in downtown Athens, you know, knowing that this plane, cheering this plane on, or you know, videotaping it. Nowadays, you would have had people
Yeah.
in the as passengers with their cameras out, you know, videotape. Remember, those people that were on that JetBlue flight were watching themselves on direct TV on the flight.
Yeah.
And
It's
eventually
crazy.
the captain turned off the TV because they knew
Right. They were
they were
panicking.
doing like play by play.
Yeah. The other interesting thing is, and maybe I don't know enough about this, but again, maybe in the time, the fact that the pilot from 411 got back on another plane and then
Yeah.
continue to fly. Because I
Yeah.
would think in situations like that, given the anxiety and everything else, that they pull you off for a debrief or something like that. But
Different time, different place, you know. At
right,
that point in time, think about it. Olympic Airlines just care that nobody died, the aircraft is still intact. So
right,
what? You got to change the engine, you know, take it back
yeah,
to the hangar, work on it for a couple of weeks until it's, you know,
yeah,
it's recertified, and put it back in the air, you know. And I think back, like I said, back then, you know, now they say nope, all publicity is good publicity. Back then, different time, different place. You
yeah,
know, I think it would have devastated I think for Olympic at that time when they were really in their height, it would have devastated that airline. It would have
right,
just pummeled them to the ground, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
But yeah. So just an amazing, amazing story. Um, this guy was just I can't say it enough. This guy was just a freaking like hero. So if there's not already, I can't speak to this. I'm not sure, but if there's not already a statue of this guy, someone needs to put it up. Okay. And don't make it like out of copper. Like we're talking like if you're gonna do it in Athens, do it right. You know, get somebody in who's great with marble. Put a statue of him up. Don't make it out of copper where he's gonna turn green after a few years, especially with
yeah, yeah,
especially with the smog that they could have in the city there, and they can get the acid rain coming down. This guy's, I don't want this guy turning gray. I want this guy to be pristine white. Like I want this guy to be like
yeah,
someone make a real little mustache on him. You know, I think it'd be phenomenal. You know, maybe the current owners of the relabeled Olympic Airlines can do something. Name a plane after him.
oh,
You
that's a
know,
good
do
one.
something like that. You know,
Yeah,
name your training center after him. You know, you know what? Even better. Listen, those working at Athens Airport, name the control tower after him. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
let everybody know who this guy. This guy should have, as far as I know, August 9th should be a national holiday to this guy.
yeah,
Okay? I
yeah.
know it's somebody's name day. I don't know whose name day it is, but this guy should have his own day, okay? He should be the patron saint of flying in Greece. So, just
Great
crazy
story.
story, crazy, crazy story.
Great story.
So, but I think this is going to conclude our
Yeah,
episode today
I
of
think that was a good thing to cover. I think that was a good way to spend some time with that if you're not familiar with that story. Like I
you know what, I
said,
just realized that we didn't introduce ourselves at the beginning of the show, but we're going to do it now anyway. So, as we close up, if you guys have any comments, feel free to reach us out. If anybody knows anybody that was on this flight, reach out to us. If
yeah,
like I said before, if you're a movie producer, movie writer, especially a writer, put this on somebody's desk. Do
right.
not put it on Iger's desk down in Disney, okay? This needs to go to Universal, something like that. Okay.
I think with the writer and actor strike, it may take a while, but
Well, let somebody start writing it and put
the
it out
point
there.
is, yeah, the point is well
Someone
stated.
can
Yeah,
start writing it. You don't have to put it out there, but just start writing this. This is a
yeah.
great story. And you know what? Listen, find a good actor. Does it have to be Tom Hanks? No, it doesn't have to be Tom Hanks. Tom Cruise. Maybe Tom Cruise. I don't know if he'll do it because there's no missiles on the plane. So I don't know. And there's no explosions in the story, so I don't think Tom Cruise would do it. But I'm sure there's plenty of
Yeah.
we can also thank God we're not calling this big fat Greek explosion. Talking
Right.
about fat Greek. So listen, folks, in about a month, I believe it's September 8th, Big Fat Greek Wedding Part 3 is coming out.
Yeah.
We will be reviewing that movie probably
Yeah.
within that first week, but we'll let you know when that episode comes out. It'll probably be in the mid-September sometimes. But for Baklava and Banter, I'm Petraki.
And I'm Soto.
Until next week, have a great week, guys. Take care.
Yasas.